Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Case Study QB, and we are in the Progressive War Room with my buddy Alex Orso. Alex Orso is a campaign staffer. She's fit various job titles on a campaign, and I thought it would be really cool. You know what the Progressive War Room about? We're about learning about the nitty gritty of how campaigns work on the inside, and she was or is a campaign treasurer. She did some opposition research and just did volunteering, and also she specializes in campaign finance. So we're going to talk about various amounts of topics. Alex, say what's up to the people.
Hey everyone, I'm Alex. I'm just glad to be here and to talk about my experience and give any, knowledge that can be useful to the movement.
Definitely. So the first question I want to ask you, you know what? Let's get right into the tweet that I teased. Like, what should progressive candidates take PAC money?
Okay, so I'm going to say this. Obviously, I don't believe in taking any corporate PAC money at all. If it's corporate, I don't believe, we need to support candidates that are backed by the corporate establishment. I mean, that's part of the issue now, right? I mean, our country is bought and paid for by corporations, and part of the way they do that is by lobbying members of Congress or potential members of Congress, when they're running as candidates. So no corporate money, as far as I'm concerned. But so no corporate PACs, right? But what I will say is that some progressive PACs that say, we don't take any corporate money, sometimes, and I'm not saying everyone, but if you trace the money that these progressive PACs take, if you trace it back to, for example, PACs can donate to other PACs. So if you go digging farther down the line enough, sometimes you'll find that corporations have given to a PAC, that have given to another PAC, that have given to another PAC, that have given to that progressive PAC. So indirectly, they might have taken corporate money without their knowledge, maybe. So it gets really tricky. I would say that if you do want to take some progressive PAC money, I say that claims to be non-corporate to help your race, because obviously funding campaigns is really hard. I would suggest that candidates really look at who is donating to that PAC, and if you can say after you've done your research, if you can say that they haven't taken any corporate PAC money, then I think it's a good way to help fund a campaign. But you just have to be really careful, because how do you say that you're non-corporate if you take money that inadvertently did take money from a corporate PAC or from corporations? So I just think you have to be really careful with taking money from PACs. I don't recommend it. I just think it gets too messy. And again, I just really think we need to stay away from corporate money. So I would say no. But I do understand that some campaigns need to, in order to sustain their campaign. But again, if you're going to, you really need to pay attention to who's donating to those PACs.
So what would be the best way for progressive? Let's say you're running for candidate for a house or whatever, position. How would you do it?
I would either myself or someone that I know is helping me on the campaign. I would have them, or again, myself, do the research. I like to use open secrets. I find that it is useful in looking at PAC donations. So do the research, see if you can.
So would you take PAC money, period, or would you? What would you do? I know you're not taking corporate PAC. That's of course, any person.
You wouldn't take any PAC money. Okay, no, I wouldn't.
Gotcha.
Personally, now.
So only small donations, like $5 at a time, $27 at a time,
just from people.
Yeah, and then the max is what, 2,400.
2,900
for one person. So, and you would go with that max, once they max out. That's it.
I would. Again, I've been on some campaigns that have taken some progressive PAC money, and as long as the research is done and there's no corporate PAC money, I get it. But I personally would not.
That's just to let the audience know, even Bernie, I wouldn't say he took it, but like
Right.
a super PAC, you don't
Yeah.
have a choice, really. You don't have a choice. But the nurses union, they
Mhm.
had a super PAC for Bernie, so that's an example of true progressives. They were
Yeah.
for Medicare for all, and they had, and I don't even think it was millions of dollars. It was like maybe 500,000 if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's get into your experience with campaigns. So you go through the rundown. You don't have to tell me the names
Right.
of the campaigns, but I would love to know your progression, and we'll talk about what you have learned throughout the process.
Yeah. So I started helping Bernie's campaign in 2019. Just, making calls to voters, phone banking, and then eventually I was canvassing. I also helped organize, well, not, I don't say organize the Bernie Sanders rally in Sacramento, but I did volunteer at the rally. Um, After that, there was a local candidate. I don't say local candidate. He was in Sacramento. He's running for Congress, but it was a very small campaign. I helped on that for a few months, and then I started working on a campaign in New York, where I did a lot of research. I did a lot of phone banking and a lot of research, a lot of opposition research, a lot of research on policies. I actually helped draft a policy that she wound up using in her platform. Um, then she did not win the primary, so I moved on to another candidate, another campaign that was also primarying a incumbent Democrat who wound up winning. I was doing research for that campaign as well. I also have helped a campaign in Florida do some research, phone banking, text banking, and then also as a treasurer. I helped a state legislature campaign also as a research director, also as the treasurer. And then I'm also helping a progressive challenge an incumbent Democrat in Washington, and I'm the treasurer for that campaign. So, yeah, I've done a lot. I've done a lot of research, mostly campaign finance, and then also like field. So, calling voters, knocking on doors, things like that. So, kind of done it all, except managing a whole campaign because I do work full time and it's just too much to do. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I've been
yeah.
there, done that.
Tell me about that, because as a volunteer, and you
Mhm.
know, there's super volunteers, and then there's passive
Yeah.
volunteers, people who just volunteer where they
Mhm.
can. Like, so what did you do? So per week, would you say you did 4 hours a week or 10 hours a week?
More. So per week, I would say at least 10 hours. Usually at least, and on some weeks it would be more than that, especially if, once the election's coming up, you really have to, it's like all hands on deck, when you're doing GOTV, get out the vote. So it really depends, but at least 10 hours a week. So I was,
Mm,
I guess more of a super volunteer because I did multiple things on a lot of
mm,
campaigns. I wasn't just doing one thing.
okay.
Um, so, yeah, I did a lot.
Cool. Cool. So you said you did opposition research. I'm
Mhm.
just curious, that's dabbling in kind of the dark arts of
Yeah.
campaigning. So I'm curious, tell me as much as you can about that situation.
Yeah, so opposition research, for anybody who doesn't know, it's, you're digging up dirt, right? You're digging up dirt on the opposition, on your opponent. Um, I did some opposition research for the candidate in New York and then a candidate, in Missouri. Um, so It's really interesting. I would usually start with, see what committees, because they were running against incumbents, so I mainly did a research on the incumbents that they were, running against, that were challenging. So I would start to see what committees they're on, and then I would go from there, like, what votes they cast for certain bills and what bills they've drafted, and, seeing their priorities, and then also seeing what their district needs, because if, they're not bringing, legislation to the floor, not voting for legislation that could help their community, could help their district, then it's like, what are you doing? Why are you there? You see that, that is something you can, I hate to use the word attack, but, attack them with, it's like, okay, well,
Hmm.
for example, one of the incumbents, had a really large public housing complex that was in very bad shape.
Mm,
She hadn't been fighting to get better funding for the public housing in the city, and we attacked her for it. And you also can go back and look to see what investments they have, because they have to disclose that to they have to disclose that as part of, like, it's like, for transparency purposes, like, if they're regulating, if they're on a committee that regulates, like, energy, and they invested in a lot of, like, Chevron or, like, ExxonMobil stock. It's like, okay, well, you're supposed to be regulating them and you're invested in it's a conflict, right? So I did a lot of research for that too. Found some stuff. So everything is really just, as far as opposition research goes, it's to use to your advantage to try to highlight and shine a light on what your opponent is not doing, what they could be doing, if they've done anything really bad in the past. Like, um, I hadn't really found too much on the incumbents, as far as like really, really, really bad like character flaws, but on some of the opponents, for example, one of the candidates I worked for got past the primary. So when she got past the primary, she was running against a Republican, in the general election, right? She was running against a Republican and someone that ran as an independent. Both I found to be very racist. One was like part of the Boogaloo Boys or something. Like,
mm,
it was bad, right?
mm,
So, had to really just scrub their social media, like go through their Twitter, like all their tweets, and just it's very time consuming, but
mm,
you find things.
mm,
So yeah, it's interesting,
mm.
going
Yeah,
down that rabbit hole, but it's very necessary because, again, a lot of voters don't know who these candidates are. So you really, in order to put it into context, in order to make the argument that you're the best person to, represent the district, you really have to do it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's important.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, definitely if you're going up against some, bad people, some the Ted Cruzes of the
Mhm.
world, I definitely would want us to use
Yeah.
all the tools in the toolbox. But even when you started off talking, that sound like legit things that you would want to do anyway. You want to research the votes that the campaign, the opposition did, any bad votes, if they're not having their ear to the ground to the constituents, the people that if there's a lot of potholes, for example, and they're doing nothing for that, that's something that you would want to research, and then you could
Mhm.
cut an ad for that. So yeah, that's definitely interesting. So I want to ask you, with all the different experience you have on going on different campaigns,
Mhm.
what were some of the good things that you saw that a campaign did, and then what were some of the bad things you
Yeah.
saw?
So in my opinion, um, as far as, well, just in general, like, you really, really, really have to have good communication with your team. If you don't, it's not going to go well, because everybody's going to be on different pages, or people, might take things the wrong way and then might not come back or might not be as motivated. So you really have to, communicate well. And part of that is not only, communicating well as a candidate, communicating to the volunteers, because it's really important for the candidates to be involved in the campaign as far as like interacting with volunteers. But you really need to have a good communications manager. You really need to have a good campaign manager too, because, again, you just communicating with not only the district, the constituents, the possible voters, but communicating with the volunteers, because they're your team. Like, if you don't have a good team, you're less likely you're going to win. Like, you really need people to go out there and fight for you and to get the vote out, right? So keeping them motivated, communicating well so everybody's on the same page. Um, and just really focusing and staying true, I think, to your values and to what the reasons that you ran. Because I've seen a lot of campaigns kind of, maybe like shy away from certain things that they initially wanted to fight for, because either they didn't think it was getting traction, or like, their donors didn't. And by donors, I mean even, small dollar donors. If you have a policy that you're fighting for that people aren't necessarily donating for, when because you'll send text messages, you'll like call possible donors, doing call time as a candidate, you have to do that to raise money. If you're not, if you're trying to, like, say immigration is a very important issue for you as a
Mhm.
candidate, but the district, some parts of the district might not really, it might not be their top issue. And if you see like, okay, well, it's not really gaining that much traction as far as fundraising goes, I'm just going to not really, push for that anymore or whatever. Like, I think that it's really important to stick to um, the reasons you ran and what you're passionate about. And, just stick to what's going to benefit like everybody as a whole, regardless of what I guess your donors would say, or regardless of what some, opposition would say, because I think that, I mean, if you're going to shy away now, how are you going to act when you're in office? And people see that. People see that. So it's really important
Mhm.
to stick to what you're saying.
What about the mechanics of the
Yeah.
campaign? Like, did you see the candidates have their ear to the ground? Did they work with the volunteers a
Yeah.
lot, or were they ghosting the campaign office? I don't know. Well, that's a good question too. Did you work in the campaign office? Did they even have a campaign office that you had to go to?
So a lot of the campaigns that I worked at were not where I was. So I was just usually doing things virtually. So I didn't actually get to meet anybody in person because it was, mostly during the pandemic, like in 2020. Um, Now for the Bernie campaign, there was a campaign office that I went there a few times because we were canvassing, but all the other campaigns were really not where I was. But as far as the mechanics go, if the candidates didn't, and this was really challenging during COVID, right? But if the candidates weren't on the ground knocking doors, if people weren't sending text messages to voters, if people weren't calling voters, you know, they didn't do well. I mean, even if you do that, you still might lose. But like, if you don't call people, if you don't get the word out to people that you're running and why you're running, if you don't get your message out, you're not going to win. And I did see, again, people, as far as messaging goes, if they didn't get the message out or if they didn't say the right message, they didn't do well. So you really have to just be on the ground and you have to, listen to the voters. And again, as far as mechanics go, the campaigns that didn't communicate well among their staff either, that's a no go. Like you just have to. I've seen campaigns break down because of lack of communication. Um, as far, you have to keep you have to keep the volunteers motivated. If you didn't keep the volunteers motivated, they're not going to come back. They're not going to help you. You're not going to win.
Yeah,
So
like how many times a week did they have meetings, or was there daily
yeah,
meetings? Or go ahead.
yeah. So a lot of times they would have like call time or texting, like text banking and phone banking, maybe a few times a week. So like 3-4 times a week, and that's usually when like that team would meet. So like if you're on the field team, which is like phone banking, text banking, and knocking on doors, we would meet usually whenever we were going to reach out to the voter. So like beforehand, like before the phone banking session, we would meet for a little while and like, okay, this is what we're gonna really talk about today. We're gonna go over the script. Does anybody have any questions? Does anybody want to go over it before we start? And it's a really good way to make sure everybody's on the same page and to take account of like who's volunteering, who's showing up. And like say somebody isn't showing up, you can reach out to them. What's up? Like, do you need help? Is there a reason why you don't want to volunteer anymore? And when you actually show as like either a candidate or like a field director, if you actually show that you care whether or not they participate, it's more motivating to people, and they'll show up more. You know what I'm saying? You
So
really
whose
have to
job
keep
is that?
motivating
Was
people.
that your job? Was it other volunteers' job? Was that strictly the volunteer coordinator's job to try to continue to reach out to other volunteers?
Yeah, so usually I wasn't really a volunteer coordinator, so I didn't do too much of that, but it's usually either the volunteer coordinator or the field director, depending on who's, I guess, running that phone banking session, or, whose job it is. Some campaigns might have just the volunteer coordinator do it. Some campaigns might just have the field director do it. It just depends. But like whoever is like running those phone banks or text banks or canvassing, that's who really runs the meeting and like kind of checks up on
What's the
the
hierarchy of for the volunteering department? Is there like field coordinator, and then that field coordinator would have field volunteers, or how does that
Yeah.
work?
So most campaigns that I've been on, it's like different. You have different, like, I don't want to say departments, but different like aspects of a campaign, right? You have field, which is like reaching voters, like canvassing, phone banking, text banking, right? So you have a field director, and then sometimes you'll have like field coordinator or volunteer coordinator who kind of like helps the field director manage all of the like, okay, projects of like field, like, okay, when's the best days to, canvas or phone bank or text bank and like the data. And then like you have one of them will reach out to volunteers, and then you'll have like underneath, so field director, coordinator of some kind, and then a lot of volunteers. So both of them have to split the duties, right? The field director and the coordinator. And then like for other,
Are
like,
there more than one coordinator? Like, would a field director have like three coordinators? Mm-hmm.
It depends. So like I have never seen that many. Usually you're lucky to have one on these smaller campaigns especially, but usually it's just a field director. Sometimes you'll get a coordinator, and then obviously volunteers. Now I see purpose in having more than one coordinator, but it's not always possible because, like, again, it's just keeping people engaged is very challenging on a campaign. It's one of the hardest things to do, in my opinion, next to raising money. So it depends. Short answer, it depends.
Okay.
And then as far as other, like, research, you'll have a research director usually. Sometimes they'll answer to the campaign manager if, you can't really find anybody to take on the responsibility of a research director. But under that, it's like just the research volunteers. The hierarchy tends to not have too many layers, just because when, the more layers you have, the more channels things have to go through, the more things can be miscommunicated. And again, like, you don't always have people willing or able to play all these roles. So a lot of times it will fall on whoever's like head of that like section of the campaign, if that makes sense. So a lot of times a lot will fall on the campaign manager, because a lot of people just can't put a lot of time into managing one aspect of the campaign. So
Gotcha. Very interesting. Yeah. So let me go into one of the fascinations and the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about this volunteer section, especially is I'm working on the People's Gauntlet initiative. And right now, basically, that is candidates. If you go to the site peoplesgauntlet.com, you're going to see 4 candidates. They are all contenders. What that means is they have finished all 5 gauntlets. Each gauntlet has from 6 to 10 topics that they will talk about on camera, and you'll be able to see how committed they are. You see their charisma. You'll be able to see how they articulate their thoughts on that particular topic. So, for example, Medicare for All is there, from Medicare for all the way to Palestinian conflict, and they will speak on all of those. So I'm thinking the status you're at is contender, and then the ultimate status is a people's champion. That means you have the endorsement of the People's Gauntlet. And how do you get that? Well, the grassroots will vote on it. So that's what makes us different from like Justice Democrats, Democracy for America, Our Revolution. This is an initiative where the grassroots participates, and they will be able to help decide who gets the endorsement, other than somebody behind closed doors deciding, and you don't even know how they came up with it. And I'm not disparaging those organizations. We're trying to create something different. So I'm hoping, and I'm thinking, how do we get that grassroots to vote, right? So I'm thinking that the contenders will be able to allow their volunteers to join the site. And then when they volunteer, they do certain volunteer actions, they'll be able to get points, like PG points, for knocking on doors, for phone banking, for doing the text messaging. So I wanted to find out the dynamics of volunteering and try to make it fun. And hopefully it will allow volunteers to be more engaged. So instead of, like you said, that volunteers might fall off, or they're not as engaged, maybe if they had some kind of goal, like every week they can see who got the most PG points, who did the most volunteering, and they could be like, oh, I want to be at the top of the leaderboard. Or I'm also thinking of if they have 20 volunteers on a campaign, maybe they split up into groups like this 5. They team up and they're trying to get more points than the other team, and they might try to do friendly battles and stuff like that. So I'm hoping that me doing this fact-finding mission, and I'm going to be talking to various other people, that can help the campaign without hindering it, because that's something I want to be cautious of as well. I don't want to slow down the knocking on doors. If they have to, every time they knock on the door, they got to go to the app and log it so they get a point, So what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I think that would keep volunteers more engaged because it's kind of like a goal. They have, well, obviously the goal is to get the candidate elected, but sometimes that goal seems so like either unreachable or far off, and like it can be discouraging sometimes, especially if you're making calls and people aren't really responding, to your message. I think knowing that you're also working towards another goal, it is important to, for motivation. So I think that's a really good idea. Now, I think I mentioned this to you before, but um, for example, like what you just said with like, you don't necessarily have to log something every time you knock on a door or something. For example, when I was canvassing for Bernie, you actually did have to like log something on your phone, like when you spoke to a voter. It was like an app, right? So they did know how many doors you knocked, right? Now, not every campaign will use something
Hmm.
like that, but I mean, it's useful because you have all your voter data. Like, oh, they said they're going to vote for you, and then that kind of goes into your numbers for field. So like these many people, we still have to reach all these other people that either didn't respond or it's good for data purposes. So
Exactly.
it kind of
Was
serves.
that van, Alex, that you're talking about? That Alex,
Um,
that Bernie had, or was that their own customized app that they had?
Yeah, so I can't even remember the name of the app, but the app that I'm talking about that we kind of logged, who we spoke to, it wasn't Van. They got the data from they probably got the data from like NGP Van, but like the app that we logged everything in on, whether or not we talked to them or whether or not they're a supporter, it wasn't Van. It was, I can't remember the name of it.
Can you describe Van to the audience for those who don't know?
Yeah, I'm not an expert, but it's like
Mhm.
I'm really not because I've never been like I mean I've worked in field, but anyway, it's like data, voter data, right? So, when a candidate runs, in order to know who to reach as far as, who you can convince to vote for you or just who votes in the district van, that's where you get the data from.
Exactly. And they, unfortunately, sometimes the establishment uses Van as a tool to like not give it to the progressive in the
Yes.
race,
Yes.
or it costs a lot of money in certain.
Yes.
Every district is a little bit different on how they handle Van, and it can be so. That's something that I'm wondering if we can come up. I think Bernie came up with a workaround, or I think it was like AOC's campaign had some kind of workaround that I'm hoping that we can maybe systemically have a version of Van incorporated into the People's Gauntlet at some point down the line. But the whole point of the People's Gauntlet is to help build the infrastructure for grassroots candidates, progressive candidates. It is a leftist organization, even though any party can do the gauntlet technically. Like if you go to the candidates page, you see Democrat, Republican, Movement for People's Party, Green Party, non-affiliate. Anybody can do the gauntlet, but it's definitely, as you, if you see the different topics, it's all topics that the left cares about. All right, so I want to also ask you, um, what do you think? What does it take for a candidate to actually win a race? So, what did you see in a race that was definitely different from somebody who did not win to somebody who did win? Because I know you were on a race that won. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say simply like just very simple. I think candidates or campaigns with money and campaigns that have a good team that actually get the word out. Those are the two most important things. And I know it sounds cliche and like duh, but like it's just so important. The more money you have, the more you can spend on ads. Um, the more you can get the message out. I mean, obviously you have field volunteers that are, gonna go knock on doors for you. You still have to get campaign literature, like posters, like things you hand out when you knock on doors. And you also have to pay for all the calls that you make, like the platforms that you use to make the calls and make the text messages, that costs money. Um, it costs a lot of money, for your campaign staff. You have to pay them. It's just, and if you don't have full-time people, if you don't have a full-time campaign manager, if you don't have a full-time, people actually managing all the volunteers, then it's just really hard. So you have to raise money in order to pay full-time campaign staff. Um, so money. And then just, a good team, a good field team specifically because
Mhm.
if they're not communicating the message correctly to the voters, if they're not putting in the hours to get the message out, If everybody's not on the same page, you're not going to win. Messaging is key. I mean, how else will the voters know who's better, as far as like who we need to vote for? So, and not everybody is going to convey that message appropriately. Or some people might say they're speaking to X amount of voters, and they might be speaking to them, but they might not actually be engaging. So it's really challenging to make sure that the volunteers are getting your message across. Obviously, everybody tries their best, but some people just aren't, maybe not cut out to do certain things on a campaign, and maybe you can use them elsewhere. So it's just hard to, try to figure all that out. It can be challenging. So
Interesting.
I would say money
Money.
and a good team, specifically a good field team.
So let me ask you this question. And James Root, I see your 2 comments, and I'm going to come to it in a moment. But I was listening to a lot of India Walton videos recently. The socialist that she won the primary in for the Buffalo mayoralship, and she said basically like the whole thing was powered by volunteers for the most part, and of course she's raising money also. But I'm wondering, do you think that there's ever a possibility that you can literally win a race off of a strong volunteer people power ran campaign over money? So let's say, of course, you're going to raise money, and anybody's going to raise a certain amount of money. But let's say it's a race that typically that race gets $2 million. The incumbent raises to run ads and all that, the big shebang. But then you have a grassroots candidate who might raise, let's say, lowballing at 50,000 to 100,000, but they have a robust. You think if they have a robust volunteer base, like, can that be enough to win a district? What do you think?
I think you can. So if you don't have a lot of money, but you have really dedicated volunteers, you can have most of the campaign be on a volunteer basis if you don't have the money to actually hire them as staff, which, if they're willing to do that, obviously that's good. And if you have a lot of people willing to go knock doors for you, that saves money because you're not paying for like the platform when you call. I mean, obviously you do have to make calls still, but if you canvass more, that's maybe less calls that you can make if you don't have that much money, right? So if you have a lot of people knocking doors for you, absolutely. I mean, again, it's really, you have to get the message out there. So if you're doing it through like knocking on doors more instead of calling, that's great. To my knowledge, and I'm not, I didn't really start, most of my volunteering was done during and like COVID. So I don't know how, as far as like, I don't know if maybe in the past, there was more canvassing because it was possible before COVID. So I think it's more face to face, it's more engaging. So I think a lot of times campaigns would rather the, canvassing anyway. So yes, short answer, yes. But you do still need some money to make calls that, sometimes people don't answer their door. So you do still need money to make calls, make texts and have some literature when you do knock the doors. That way, you leave them with something. They may forget your name. So as long as they have campaign literature, they know who you are, or not you, but the candidate. They know who the candidate's name is. They know the platform they're running on.
So you just give out brochures?
Yeah.
Mainly, or do you? I'm thinking like magnetic, little things that reminds you when to vote on, the primary days. That's something that you might give out to, or is that too expensive?
Yeah, no, it just depends. So like usually like the literature, as far as like a brochure or like just a little flyer or a door hanger, like a lot of times that'll be cheaper. So a lot of times, campaigns will focus doing that. But I've seen other things being given out, which is helpful, like like little stickers or like you said, little magnets. But as long as you have money for like the basic campaign literature when you're knocking the doors, and as long as you have some money to make calls and texts, you can do it if as long as you have a good team behind you and people willing to go out there. So that's mainly, if you don't have the money, as long as you have a team, I think you can definitely win. It's just about getting the message out there.
Nice. All right, let's go to the chat. James Root, and shout out to Kathy Lloyd, who's also in the chat. So James said, I'm wondering how they use that data to know what areas to target. I guess that's what he's talking about, Van. And then also, I've seen stories from canvassers in other towns during the 2020 election saying they were avoiding talking to Republican-leaning voters in Wisconsin, etc., or they were directed to avoid certain homes. So I'm wondering if what he's going with that comment is if you should even try to knock on Republican doors or try to convert a Republican to vote for your candidate.
Mhm. Yeah. So it depends on the state. So some states have closed primaries. So if you are, say, you're running as a Democrat challenging a Democratic incumbent, and the state that you're running in has closed primaries, meaning only registered Democrats can vote for you in the primary. I'm not saying that targeting or talking to Republican voters is a waste of time. I think everybody needs to, be educated on the issues. But um, if they're not willing to switch their party affiliation, then they can't vote for you anyway in a closed primary state. So in that sense, it would be a waste of time because a lot of times with one interaction, I mean, you can convert somebody with one interaction, but depending on who's messaging, it's going to be hard. So it's easier to, in my experience, and what campaigns usually, which is the reason campaigns usually do this, is whoever has voted for, if you're running as a Democrat, I'm saying, but like say you have the list of voters, you know who they voted for in the past. It's easier to try to convince them, like if you're running as a Democrat, like, okay, I'm running as a Democrat, challenging the incumbent. This is why I'm better. They're not really doing what they said they were going to do, blah, blah, blah. It's easier to convince them because you have that D next to your name because, a lot of people vote on party lines. So then if you talk to the Republican, they're like, oh, I'm a Republican. You're not convincing them, and then they can't vote for you anyway. So it's like that's why they don't really target them, especially close primary states. Now, in an open primary state, I think there's more value because they don't have to register as a Democrat to vote for you in the primary if you're challenging an incumbent. I think, targeting more, I guess, moderate Republicans would be more of value because they're more likely to vote for you, right? Like if they voted for Democrats in the past.
Yeah.
It really depends on the area, I would say.
See, I guess it depends on how much volunteers and how many volunteers you have. But I was thinking, wouldn't it be great to like incorporate mutual aid into your campaign, right?
Yeah.
So if I was running, or I'm sure if you were running, you would have your volunteers and say, okay, who would be willing to do more above and beyond? So we can, when you go to knock on doors, not only sell the campaign, whatever that script looks like. And I think I want to ask you what a typical script sounds like. Also, remind me to come back to that.
Okay.
But I would say, you give your spiel, but then also say, hey, by the way, before I leave, is there anything that you need? Anything that you need, period. Do you need like shrubbery moved and brought to the front so that the garbage department can take it away? Do you need your lawn cut? We can't do it every week or every month, but is there something I can immediately do to help you in some little way in your life right now? And I think that the law of reciprocity, I think if that's how you pronounce
Reciprocity.
There you go, Alex, using that college education, LSU. Yeah, so human nature is going to kick in and say, wow, these people care about me. I wonder what I can do in return for that person. And shoot, your vote would be nice. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that transactional. It could just be out of love. And that's what progressives are about. And being on the left is more about community and just helping people. So that's really where that should come from. But if you can get your candidate elected to get us bigger change, that's even better. What you think about that?
Yeah. So I think that mutual aid is very important because it helps people right now. Obviously, electoral politics, we're aiming to get systemic change. But like, in the meantime, like it doesn't happen overnight, right? Even if somebody gets elected, they can't just snap their fingers and do X, Y, and Z. Mutual aid helps people in the meantime. It helps people right now, and it really helps build a sense of community. Again, because it shows the community, even if they don't vote for you, even if they don't want to vote for you, if you get elected, you have to represent people that don't agree with you. You really need to show people that you're willing to help them when they need it. because it's like, okay, if you're going to help them now before you're even in office, it's a better indication that you're actually going to do what you said you're going to do, and you're actually going to help the community, represent them in office. So it makes a better case for your campaign, right? But also, um, it just, like, for example, when I started phone banking for the candidate in New York, the pandemic was really bad in New York. It was really bad. So we were making wellness checks, like wellness calls. So we were phone banking and like trying to educate people about the campaign, but we were starting the conversation with, do you need anything? Like, do you need groceries delivered to you? Like X, Y, and Z, like just seeing what they needed, because we knew that people were in need at that time. And it felt very selfish and just wrong to not offer, like, we're asking for your vote, but you're struggling right now. Like, what do you need? Like, we need to help people because that's the priority right now. People are struggling, right? Priority is not the campaign. The priority is to help people because it was just a really bad time. I mean, a lot of people are struggling every day, much less, with the pandemic, but that was just an example, obviously. But no, I think leading with mutual aid, again, makes a better case for your campaign. It also helps build community, and it helps people. It's like, it's just good in every aspect, right? That's been my focus lately, is a lot of mutual aid.
Yeah.
Still doing electoral politics, but
Yeah.
again, mutual aid is just, it's very important. It also allows, again, I'm going to stress this with building the community, because say the candidate doesn't win, the
Mm.
candidate can still continue the mutual aid efforts
Yeah.
and building the
Yeah.
community in the district. And then
Yeah.
it can, yeah, and it can just keep that relationship going and
Going.
build like help build it even further. That way,
Yeah.
if that candidate does decide to run again, or if some other leader emerges from
Mm.
that community and that movement, they can run, and they already have
Yeah.
the community behind them because they've
Yeah.
been involved and they've been establishing themselves.
hundred
And they're
percent.
also more likely to, be accountable, in my opinion, to that community, because you're more involved with them. You're part of that community, right? So like, how do you go back to your community and then like, oh, sorry guys, I haven't done what I said I was going to do.
Yeah.
You just,
Yeah. Yeah.
it helps them hold them accountable. And it's just, also, I think if you're sick of the duopoly, it's a good way to, if you want to run a local candidate after you've built that community with mutual aid, you want to run as a third party because you don't want to run as a Democrat, you don't want to run as a Republican, which I think is really important to establish a, third party framework.
Yeah.
Um, it's easier to do that on the local level and community level at that point too, because you've already built that community, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
100%. I wonder, do you know of any other ideas like for mutual aid that a
Mhm.
campaign can do? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so like what I was just describing that what we did in New York was, I helped get groceries delivered to an elderly lady. So you can do, like grocery delivery, or you know, if you fundraise separately for like a mutual aid, because like you have to keep it separate for campaign finance reasons, like the FEC rules or whatever. So say you have like a special fundraiser just to, buy some supplies to hand out in the community, or to feed people in the community, the unhoused population. So you can fundraise separately for that. And you can tell people, hey, this money isn't even going to me. Like, this is for the community. Let's help raise money for the community so we can literally feed people, or we can, buy like diapers for, kids that, are in need, or school
Mm.
supplies or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
just so many things you can do because there's so many
Wow.
things people need.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah.
you said earlier, like, even if somebody needs like you said, what did you say? Like their grass cut or something? Like, you
Yeah.
can do that
Something
too.
simple like that. I'll tell you this real quick. I came up with that example because there's a church in my area that came by and just knocked on our doors and was like, "Hey, we're a church down the block, but we just wanted to introduce us in the church. But do you need anything done? Do you need any yard work done?" And I happen to have like in the backyard in the corner, there's shrubbery that me by myself, I was procrastinating probably more than anything, putting it out to the front. I was like, "Hey, if you can help me with that." And that left such a lasting impression on me. I never went back to the church because I go to my own church and I play the piano in my church, so it would be tough. But I've always thought about that church, and someday I'm going to go check them out. But it definitely left an impression on me that I will never forget. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, people remember that, people remember that. And again, I'm not just speaking of like, oh, you're just doing this to get elected. I mean, obviously that's why you're running. It's important to get elected, but it also just, I think, helps put everything into perspective for the candidate as well, because if they see, okay, I do believe these things, but my district is really struggling. People are really struggling out here. It might cause them to fight even harder. And to, again, like I said, they'll be more accountable, in my opinion, if they do get elected. So it's a good experience, I think, for everybody in the community. And like you said, it leaves a really lasting impression. People are going to remember someone that helped them more than they're going to remember just somebody that gave them a piece of paper or just made a phone call to them, right? So it's good for everyone, I think, for the campaign, and then like even beyond the campaign. And again, you're helping people, which in my opinion, like the only reason I care about politics, but the main reason that I'm even involved is because I care and I want better results. I want a better, better things for the country. I want people, I don't want people to suffer. I don't want people to be oppressed. You know what I'm saying? And it's just, it's good for everyone, I think.
Yeah, 100%. I'm hoping that through the People's Gauntlet, the idea is that if there's several people in one district, let's say, there's a Green Party, Democrat, Movement for People's Party, a Socialist. There's 4 people who did the gauntlet in one district. Now they're all competing to become the people's champion. So I kind of talked to you about this before. Like, so this is a good way for a third party candidate to build an infrastructure, because like, let's say the Green Party candidate has the most charismatic, the person that galvanizes and gets the most votes and becomes the people's champion for that district. The idea is that everybody else in good faith would drop out, endorse the people's champion, and then we all together use our infrastructure, use all of our volunteers. Even though your particular candidate didn't win the people's champion endorsement, what this is for a higher purpose. And the idea is hopefully everyone comes together and tries to push that candidate over the top. So it's going to, that's the idea right now. I don't know if that might change a little bit slightly, because it's going to be interesting if we get a people's candidate to be a third party. So let's say there's a Green Party champion, but then there's the establishment Democrat, and let's say it's a blue district. Like, they're going to be going up against the Republican, or maybe the Republicans. Some districts are so blue, the Republican doesn't even run, right? So now you're in the general, and you definitely have a Green Party versus that establishment Democrat. And if you have all this infrastructure, that's where it came to that question I asked you before, like between money and people power. That would be a very good case study to see how much a third party can galvanize and how much a percentage of the votes. Hopefully that they can win, and we would get our first like Green Party or Socialist in the House of Representatives, for example. What you think?
Yeah, I think that it's really good because, again, like it's really important for me, like, to build infrastructure for like third party, because I just, the duopoly, I just, people need other options. It's not working for us, right? So I think it's really important as far as building third party infrastructure. I think it would be really helpful, but also, it just, it really helps you, like, get your message out there and kind of like, be accountable, I think, because you're saying that you support all these things, right? If you have to come out and say you support all these things and you come back and you're like not really doing that, or you're kind of backtracking on what you said, it's like, okay, well, what's going on? It's like they're kind of on record, like saying that they hard support that, right? And then also, like, people are involved, right? Like, I think you touched on this earlier, like, as far as like, voting for the people's champion, like the people are involved and it helps them stay engaged. So I really think it's a good idea, honestly. I mean, it's we have to try different things. We have to try to I mean, the way campaigns have been run before, especially as far as like how the way campaigns have been run before, we see that it's not always done right because people don't always win, and it's not always necessarily the campaign's fault, but you have to, we need fresh ideas. I think it's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, I really like the idea. Cool. And especially the voting part. I really like that part.
Thank you so much.
The people's champion aspect of it is really good.
Cool. Let me go to the chat real quick. So I want to give a shout out to all my people in the chat. So we got James Root, we got PJ Chris, PJ Holly, who and All for Nothing 388, who's usually on our Monday night shows at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Political Junkies with my guys. Thanks for coming through. Much love to y'all. If you have any questions for Alex, please let me know in the chat and we could answer as we start to wrap this up. It's about to come to the 11 o'clock hour. And yeah, thank you so much. I'm slowly growing the idea. I'm hoping that it can definitely do some real change. And I don't expect anything this cycle, but I'm thinking for 2 cycles from now, or I would love to have something for the 2024 cycle, definitely. So anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up? I know we touched on your finance experience a little bit, and I want to go back to that and like let you riff on that a little bit more. If you have anything you want to talk about that as your experience as a treasurer of a campaign as well. Yeah.
Yeah, what I did want to say though, what I think would be good to mention, I think we talked about it before, but when we if they take corporate PAC money, and you said just kind of letting them, I guess, show who they are, and then maybe asking them before, like after they get through the process. I think that's important because
Say that again because you cut out for like 2
okay.
or 3 seconds. So say that statement one more time. I know what you're talking about, but I want the audience to know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So me and you, we talked about how up front when candidates are going through the People's Gauntlet, we don't necessarily ask them right up front, do you take corporate PAC money? Because you kind of want to see, all their stances, and then maybe say they go through the whole process, and before they become a people's champion, after they go through the process, then we kind of determine whether or not they take corporate PAC money. Because I think what I wanted to say is I think it's important because, like you said, just they show who they are, but also if you ask right up front, do you take corporate money, it kind of tells them like, oh, they're really looking at this, let me say no, even though I might want to eventually. So I think it's important. I wanted to highlight that because I thought it was a really good point. And yeah, so again, it kind of hints them if you ask them right up front, and then they kind of follow whether, whereas if you let them show who they are and then ask later, you're not like hinting that like that's what you're looking for, so they have to follow. You know what I'm saying? It's
exactly. I never want to lead the witness. Like I want you to show who you are.
There you go.
Even with the topics, even with the so for example, one of the topics in I believe it's the democracy gauntlet, where it talks about ranked choice voting. Sass, who's one of the contenders, he basically said no, ranked choice voting is not the best system, and star voting is a much better system, and so it wasn't like I was saying, hey, ranked choice voting is the best system, tell me what you think about it. I just said, hey, ranked choice voting is a system. Do you know of, I think I remember that I said, do you support ranked choice voting or another system similar to it? And that's when he was able to riff on a better system, which he actually kind of got me thinking about, maybe I should use star voting for us to decide on who will be a people's champion or something. Like maybe we should experiment with that. But yeah, it's always good because there's going to be so many different answers. There's going to be so many people doing the gauntlet. Each and every person is going to have to differentiate themselves in some way. And I definitely wanted to kind of not lead the witness at all, so that it's not cookie cutter responses from every single person, that they're going to be able to put their personality, you're going to be able to see their charisma in the videos, and then they're also going to be able to articulate the topics very well. And by how well they do, that's how I think people will decide, okay, I really like how this person explains, it really sounds like they're really close to this issue, I think I'll volunteer for them. And then when they volunteer, maybe they could find out a little bit more about the candidate. I know you said it was COVID times then, and it's kind of lifting up now where people are opening up probably campaign offices and stuff like that, and where you can actually reach out and touch, to a certain extent, or see the candidate and see how they work within a campaign system. Because I'll tell you my thinking, if I was to join a campaign and I'm going to the campaign office to pick up pamphlets and stuff, and I hardly see the candidate, I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Or if I do see the candidate and they're like blowing off everybody, just rushing in and rushing out, not saying hi, they're not really friendly, not having those good vibes, then I'll be like, you know what, let me jump over to see who else is a people's candidate in my district, and maybe I could go volunteer for them, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, with the candidates being involved in the campaigns as far as talking to volunteers and keeping them engaged is very important because, it helps the volunteers put into context like who they're fighting for. It also is it just, it's like feels more like a team, right? Like if the candidate isn't even willing to like talk to the volunteers that are helping them like run their race and win their race, it just says a lot about a candidate, and it makes you kind of just not want to work for them. So I've had better experiences, and from other worked with or talked to, it's always better, just for the campaign in general, and just as far as the results go, it's better for the candidates to be very involved with the volunteers. If I mean, obviously, you don't always have the time, but even if it's once a week, you're checking in with all the
Yeah.
volunteers. It really goes a long way. It really says a lot. It makes all the difference, in my opinion, for campaign morale and for motivation.
Nice.
I think, but
Okay.
the last thing I guess I would say is, as far as campaign finance goes, what I've seen, and that's, mainly what I do now. My degree and my, I guess, specialty, my career is in the financial industry. So that's, mainly what I do now is campaign finance. But and I don't mean like financial industry. I don't work on Wall Street, y'all. That's not what I mean. No, I'm a CPA.
Making that money, that cake.
No,
Nah, I'm just
I'm a
kidding.
CPA, so
Okay.
I do a lot of auditing and campaign finance stuff. So what I would say is, when you're looking at a candidate or even an incumbent, whether or not to vote for or run against or to support or whatever, if you're looking into who's running and who's in office, you really have to look at what they support, and if they're in office, what they voted for, and you have to look at who donates money to their campaign, because a lot of times it goes hand in hand, right? So if, for example, I was on a campaign where this congressperson literally did nothing. They barely even voted. When they did vote, it was just status quo, like voting for, anything to help corporations, nothing really to help the district. District's struggling, by the way, but didn't really do anything for the district. But like when you look at her donations, it's nothing but corporate PAC money. It's nothing but all this corporate PAC money. And then, you're supporting, you're not trying to, do anything to help, climate change or like the environment. But then you get all these donations from corporations that pollute the environment. So like, of course, you're not going to do anything to help that effort, right? So campaign finance really is what everything boils down to. Again, it's why we don't have nice things. The corporations have completely bought the government and have, through legal bribery, which is campaign finance, they'll donate to campaigns. And so, in my opinion, again, it's not the only way we get what we need, but you have to eliminate that. You have to. So even if you don't really partake in electoral politics and you're like, oh, don't do that, the reality is corporations own this country. So the more we can do to get them out of control, the better. So even if it's just for that purpose, we really need to get these corporate politicians out. I mean, that's we have to. I don't see someone that takes big pharma money or that takes, healthcare industry money voting for Medicare for all. Why would they? You know what I mean? So it really is the root of everything. It really is. And then also media. I mean, media with the propaganda and everything, but that also goes to campaign finance, because a lot of these companies that fund the media are funding these campaigns. So again, it goes back to that corporate money. So that's really what it boils down to, is campaign finance, honestly.
100%, definitely, and I'm hoping that we can use this initiative to get people in office who are not taking corporate money, PAC money, or super PAC. Well, let me be specific: corporate PAC money, because it could get hairy there. But that tells you a lot about a candidate if they do say, "Hey, I'm taking no PAC money. Period. It's all small donations." I can imagine that down the line, once this initiative becomes popular, 3 cycles from now, 6 years from now, and you have 5, people's gauntlet contenders in a race, they're competing with how they can differentiate themselves from the other person. And this person might say, "Oh, I don't take any corporate PAC money." Well, you don't take any corporate PAC money. Well, I don't take any PAC money, period. It's all, you know, that's where we're like, oh, okay, that piques my interest, you know. So that's where I'm hoping that this goes in that direction. Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show. Let me just give some love real quick to everybody in the chat. Again, PJ Holly, PJ Chris, All for Nothing, Silver Wolf came by. Came by, gave some love. Who else we got here? Kathy, Lloyd, James Root. Thank you so much for coming through. And I'm just going to say one thing from PJ Chris. We've seen what cinema has not been doing and how frustrated her constituents are. They desperately want to have conversation, and she's just saying, "Don't touch me. Don't touch."
Look at who
Right?
donates to her campaign. Like, look at
Yeah,
who funds her.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
corporations. You know,
yeah.
again, that's like, y'all, I'm telling y'all, when y'all look into the issues and you look into why these politicians aren't doing what they need to do, or, you know, for their districts, for the country,
Yeah,
it's campaign finance, and it's the
yeah,
system which is corrupted by campaign finance. So
100%.
as far as corporate money goes, so it really is the big issue.
Yeah, she went to Paris, like in the middle of all these negotiations. She went to Paris to go raise money. It's just, it just tells you where her priorities are, and I would love to know who she was leading up to where she became this person. Like she, you know, some people can, you know, get mad at certain members of the squad, or that they crept a little bit to the right. You know, maybe they say AOC doesn't mention Medicare for all that much on Twitter anymore or whatever. But Kristen Sinema, from being a previous Green Party candidate or supporter, like she just like ran a mile to the right in this moment where she's against cheaper drugs, you know, medication, you know, Medicare negotiating drugs. She's against the millionaire tax. I mean, that's just running. She's pretty much a Republican at this point, you know, with that type of stance. And I would love to know, for the purpose of the People's Gauntlet, because I can imagine there's psychopaths that can go in there and say all the right things, and they just talk right in your face, and they can have the town halls and they can say all the right things, and then they get in there and they're there for 6 years, you know, and you're stuck.
And that's the thing. And what I would say is a good thing about the People's Gauntlet is you can always, like, okay, say somebody like fools everybody, like they're no corporate money, they're running on the right issues, and they get in office, they completely switch, they start taking corporate money. What the People's Gauntlet can do, okay, well, clearly you didn't stick to your values and what you were going to do, so we're going to primary you. People really need to understand that is a good way to put pressure on incumbents, and it's a good way to put pressure on politicians, is to threaten a primary, not only threaten a primary, but to do it because they know that it can be done. And then, like, once you do it, it's like, oh, well, even though maybe I beat it this time, like the incumbents thinking, oh, I beat them this time, next time we're going to come harder. So it puts pressure on them to do what the district needs them to do, because if not, they can see that it's possible for them to be voted out. Their power is threatened at that point, right?
Definitely. I'm hoping that once we allow candidates, contenders to have their volunteers join the website, they'll have their own page. They'll be able to display their points. They'll be able to get badges. They'll be able to use their points to give out leadership badges to other volunteers. And there's different ways that you can spend your points. And that's a good infrastructure, that when that candidate gets into office, you literally have that base, that volunteers base that said, hey, I got you into Congress by all this hard work that I did. We need you to vote this way, or we're going to give you a vote of no confidence, and we're going to look for a primary. And when a candidate gets into office, but then they look back and they see 10,000 of their volunteers, let's say it's 10,000 out of 15,000 or something, and they're all saying, hey, we're going to be fighting against you, we're going to get somebody else. That's powerful, right? So I'm hoping we can get that going. And hopefully with their help, I got your number, girl. So, you know, it's too late. You can't take it away.
No, you're good.
So definitely, I'm going to be leaning on you for any financial questions. But, and also I want to add you to the services page. I said that to you, and you know, for those who don't know, in the People's Gauntlet has a services page, and this is a page of progressive consultants. You know, I have Ben, my guy. I just changed his. I just made it poll. I think his website or his company is called Poll Progressive, and he's a progressive poller, and he does it in a very affordable polling. And then I'm gonna put you on there as a financial advisor or a treasurer that you can
Yeah,
be.
sure.
You're currently a treasurer, so I don't think you can. You do multiple campaigns at once? I'm just curious. Is that a thing?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that last part?
Yeah. Can you do multiple jobs on different campaigns? So like, can you be the campaign treasurer for 3 different progressive or 2 different progressives at the same time? I'm just curious.
Yeah, you can, and I
Okay.
am. I
Okay.
am. So you can, as far as like on the federal level, the FEC. I don't. There's no rules against it. So yeah, you can. To my knowledge, anyway.
Okay.
um, but yeah, no, absolutely. I'll tell you my information. You can put it on there, and also just anybody that has any questions, feel free to DM me on Twitter. It's at ALEXMORSO, Alex M Orso. My account's private, but if you request me, I'll just, I'll add you or whatever. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, let me know. It was good to be here. Thank you for having me. I know I
Yeah.
ramble sometimes. I'm sorry.
Nah,
Once I
no
start talking
worries.
about this, I just kind of go off on tangents. But let me know if you have any questions, or if you want me
Yeah.
to come back on. I'm definitely down.
Yeah.
So it
And
was
I
good talking to everyone.
definitely, I just want to shout out Fred Hampton, leftist. I met you
Yes.
on I believe it's called the Communist Corner,
It was
right?
like a little Twitter space.
It's
Yeah.
a Twitter
Communist Corner.
space,
Yeah.
and you were chatting, and I was like, man, I gotta get in contact with this person who knows so much about
Yeah.
campaign finance. That's what it's all about, right? You're meeting people, you're networking, and hopefully we can get something done for the overall progressive movement. So much love to everybody in the chat. Thank you so much for coming by, Alex. Don't be a stranger. All right, everybody.
And give to mutual
Adios.
aid. Everybody give to mutual aid. It's very important.
Yeah. So give to mutual aid if you can. And see y'all next time. Hopefully come back Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Political junkies. Much love to y'all. All right. Adios.
Bye, y'all.